Political science under the aegis of IQAC.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Rishabh Rathore,
I am Bhumika Arya.
your host for today's event. We are indeed fortunate to have with us such an eminent personality, Dr. Goel Sir.
We would like to welcome Professor Manoj Sinha, Principal, Arabic College, and along Arabic College.
We would also welcome Professor Dakshnoya, University of Cambridge. We welcome you, sir.
Before I request Dutch Sir to conduct the proceeding, we'll request Principal Sir to come over here and welcome our guests.
Thank you. Good morning. Once again, Professor Satish Shah and his team coming up with a talk that is very relevant to today's India, contemporary India. Sita Goel ji, born 1921 and up to 2003, was an Indian historian, religious and political activist, writer and publisher, known for his influential contributions to literature pertaining to Hinduism and Hindu nationalism in the late 20th century. His work has been both celebrated and criticized for its bias towards Hindu nationalism and its controversial portrayal of other religions, particularly Islam and Christianity. But today we have Professor Conrad Elst here, who has described him as an intellectual Kshatriya. And he's not the only one. David Frawley said about Goel that he was modern India's greatest intellectual Kshatriya and one of India's most important thinkers in the post-independence era. According to Frawley, Sitaram followed a strong rationalistic point of view that did not compromise the truth even for politeness' sake. His intellectual rigor is quite unparalleled in Hindu circles. I'm glad that today we have Dr. Conrad Elst, who will be speaking on Sitaram Goel ji. Uh, Dr. Elf was born in Leuven, Belgium in 1959 and holds an MA degree in Sinology, Indology, and Philosophy. He's authored more than 20 books, 25 if I'm more correct. Doctoral dissertation was around decolonizing the Hindu mind. He has written extensively on the Ram Janam Bhoomi movement in Ayodhya and was present there in 1992, I believe. His book on Sitaram Goel and his history writing has been path-breaking in understanding Indian history. He is a supporter of the out of India theory or indigenous Aryans theory. He has also published about culturalism, language policy issues, ancient Chinese history and philosophy, comparative religion, and the Aryan invasion debate. As an independent researcher, he earned laurels with his findings on topics like multiculturalism and the secular state, the roots of Indo-European, the Ayodhya temple, and Mahatma Gandhi's legacy. It's my proud privilege, Dr. Els, to welcome you to Arabhat College once again. Thank you for being here this morning. But this is not all. We are also fortunate that we have a very prominent guest today amongst us, Professor Daksh Lohia from the University of Cambridge. Thank you, sir, for being here. And since my administrative limitations do not permit me listening to the full lecture, may I request you to kindly chair today's session, sir? Will be privileged. Thank you, sir. No, please, sir. Thank you for accepting, Professor Lohia, the last moment from us, and we are privileged to have you as chairing the session today. Now, without any delay, I would not like to come between Dr. Els and you. Everybody is very keen to listen to him, and therefore, I hand over back to you for the rest of the processes. Have a very nice interaction. I'm hoping that all of you will have a lot of questions for Dr. Els. Welcome once again, sir. Thank you.
Before we start the event, I request our principal, sir, to felicitate our guest. We'll also request sir to facilitate our chair for today's event. So now, without further ado, let's dive right into the very heart of our lecture. Now, I hand over the mic to our chair to commence this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bestowing this kind of undeserved honor. I was not really prepared for this. Conrad Elst, the less said, the better. He's just an Indologist par excellence. And I've been following him in every forum. And I'm sure you'd find the talk very invigorating and very full of dialectics. And actually, it's quite straightforward. It doesn't need any argument. The relevance of this talk in today's, in the present times, is that, if you look all over the world, there's chaos. And as Hindus, we are unique. We are the most unorganized, unfunded, completely uncoordinated people in the world. And many people would find that a nice thing about us, but it isn't. It's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for extinction. Now you have to decide whether And this is in spite of our dharma. I mean, dharma, which is equated to religion which has something to do with faith. Dharma has nothing to do with faith. Dharma would be an ideal kind of a collage of ideal duties, ideal obligations, and ideal conduct. And anybody who follows this, and sages at different times have been have been assessing those times and modifying what should be the ideal duty of, you can have Raj Dharma, Pitra Dharma, Putra Dharma. You see, it was nothing to do with religion. I, for example, would want to call myself a dharmic agnostic or a dharmic atheist. But Dharma allows this. You can be dharmic and question and find your deity, find your peace. Now, this is very different from what the Abrahamic faiths preach. In Dharma, if anybody does not appreciate your beliefs, there is no provision for chopping his head off, and which is there in every Abrahamic cult. So well, I could go on and on about it, but this is not my talk. It's was Colin F's talk, which is and Sitaram Goelji did so much, and his writings were kind of belittled and what's the word that Marxists used is he was deplatformed and from academia and cancelled or deplatformed or whatever. So, and very few people know about it. But if you read this, you just have to read a few books, the Calcutta Quran Petition. And there's nothing, we'll talk about it later. It was a beautiful petition. There's nothing wrong with it. But I mean, he was ill-advised as to what the prayer was. The prayer could not be granted by court. Anyway, I welcome Conrad, and I'm looking forward to a very delightful and a very, a talk which would raise many questions and answers. Please welcome.
Yeah. Would you like to speak? Yes, I prefer.
By the way, I'm not a political scientist. I'm a rocket scientist, actually. So, well, I'm a cosmologist. I'm looking after a satellite called Planck.
Yeah, that's
Next slide. Is there a way to control the slides from here? Anyway, I'll just keep saying next slide and then you know what to do. I'll give the title, So Voice of India. Yes. So you see a picture here that came to light only a few weeks ago, thanks to David Furley. David Furley is on the left-hand side. He's an American Vedic scholar. But so the main characters here are on the right-hand side, Sita and Goel, and to his left, Ram Swarup. And so this is a historic picture. It was because there were very, very, very few pictures of them at that time. Back then, not everybody, I don't know if you can imagine that, But back then, people did not have smartphones. They did not carry a camera all the time with them. So at that time, photographs were still rather exceptional. So this is the rooftop apartment of Ram Swarup. He never married or anything. He lived by himself, but he was patronized by a businessman called Lohia. And as long as he was alive, Ram Swarup lived in rooftop apartments above Lohia's house. Okay, so what you see there are two Indian sages and two Western hippies. That's us. This is Ram Swarup. He was born in Sonipat. Today it's an important exurb of Delhi where more and more companies and universities and so on are being placed. But back then it was still a very unimportant place, and so that's where he came from. His father was a village banker, and he often took the family name Garg, his Gotra name. But so he was part of the Agarwal caste, just like Sita and Goel also. Okay, so when he was 18, he left home, he went to university, and so all the rest of his life he lived very by himself. And so initially he was a leftist, philosophically speaking, a materialist. In one of his first publications, he said, "Butter is more important than gold." And so in the beginning, he was what we would call today a liberal, not really a communist, but leftist and very skeptical of religion. He was very much a Gandhian, was a Gandhian activist, and he remained Gandhian until the end. That's less the case with Sitaram Goel, who became very critical of Gandhi. And his first two booklets concern precisely Gandhi. So he, as a young intellectual, he set up a platform called the Changers Club. This refers to Mahatma Gandhi's, to Karl Marx's well-known phrase that philosophers have so far always described the world, but the thing to do is to change it. So they were going to change the world, but effectively all they did was talk and discuss and, the usual. So they didn't change the world. A number of rather well-known people were part of it. At that time they started as students essentially. L.C. Jain, the philosopher Daya Krishna was part of it. Girilal Jain, who was the editor of Times of India, and this lady, the Tsarina of the arts, Kapila Vasyayana. And so as part of this, they had also set up a sort of publishing outfit. And so the first booklet was called Indictment of Welcome. His first booklet was called Indictment, and it was a critical review of the Quit India movement in which he himself had taken part. In fact, he He was the overground post box of Aruna Asaf Ali, who was an activist. Later, it turned out that she was actually a double agent, but he didn't know that. He spent a week in prison, not very long. But okay, so that was his involvement. And so he saw to his dismay that the whole movement was being, well, led astray, was very poorly led, and nothing came of it. And so the foreword of that booklet was written by Daya Krishna. And the first words, his first words were, "The bane of Indian politics is hero worship." So at that time, this phrase concerned Mahatma Gandhi. He could do nothing wrong. It was totally wrong to criticize him. Today, it would concern somebody else, who also has a semi-divine status. At any rate, he didn't like that so much. And the second one was about the murder of Gandhi, in which he said that, in a way, you see, it was fitting because people of that stature don't die in their bed. In a way, it was fitting for somebody controversial like Gandhi to be murdered. He also said about the murder that, in a way, it also showed that Hindu society was not dead yet. Because, they had to somehow react to the partition. And even though directing their ire against Gandhi was a bit misplaced, at any rate, they did something. They didn't just take it lying down. A very neglected influence on him was British liberalism. And so that's really a very important influence also to the end. British liberals like Bertrand Russell, Aldous Huxley, George Bernard Shaw, and George Orwell. And so that was sort of, you see, he was not a real leftist, but this progressive and skeptical attitude remained with him. Then he wrote a number of booklets about economics and about communism. Yeah, by degree, he was an economist, also here from Delhi University. And so he wrote about Gandhi and economics, several booklets, and then a lot about communism, detailed studies about Maoist China, about the Soviet Union. Then he gradually discovered Hinduism or rediscovered Hinduism. And so in 1980, he wrote a book, Names of Gods, which is about how how names of gods come about and what they mean. And what profound contents you can read in them. And it is for this that Sita Goel, his friend, founded the Voice of India as a publishing channel for Ram Swarup's books. He also wrote about Hinduism as such and about Christianity and Islam, critical studies, and he was also the main ideologue worldwide of the Hindu-Heathen Alliance, that is to say, the discovery of pagan religion or pre-Christian or pre-Islamic religion in other countries. Because a problem with the Hindu movement is that most of them, well, don't look very far. They see the Indian situation, they don't look beyond it. That was not Ram Swarup's problem. This is something that he did not found himself, but his influence there was enormous. the Worldwide Pagan Revivalist Society that has a triannual conference always in India. So it's an international body with Maoris and Yorubas and um, Lithuanian Romuva and, from all over the world. But every 3 years they come together in one city in India. This time there was a conference just a few weeks ago in Dibrugarh in Assam. So this movement is in fact a baby of Yashwant Pathak, who has served all his life as a pharmacy professor in the United States, which is very much an RSS pracharak. And it is from that Hindu vision that he set this up. So it started by contacts between Hindus and Native Americans. And then from there it spread out to other continents. A problematic thing in this organization is precisely this connection with Hindu nationalism, because you see the movement is internationalist par excellence. It's about uniting the whole, pre-Islamic, pre-Christian religions all over the world. Yet it has been set up by a movement that calls itself nationalist. And there is always a tension between that. Moreover, the RSS has a terrible reputation worldwide. And so they started in 2003, and I've been wondering all this time, how do they pull it off? You see, I would expect, that when people from New Zealand or the States or Guatemala or wherever come to India to participate in a meeting ultimately organized by the RSS, that some people, like in America, all the Hindu folks who organize conferences about dismantling Hindutva and so on, that they would certainly start propaganda against this event. To emphasize that, you are, fooled by the Hindu fascists and things like that. And so far that hasn't happened. Even though you see this picture here of these three people holding some document. So two of them are tribal leaders, and the one on the right is Mohammed of the RSS. So I think that can be used against them. And now, in fact, I do happen to know that this has been used against them. In England, there used to be some kind of cooperation between local Hindus and the native British Neo-Druid movement. And so they always had a day every year where they got together called the One Tree event. And so recently, some in this Druid movement have objected to continuing this, precisely because they had heard that this Hindu movement was to be shunned, was evil and toxic and all the rest. Ram Swarup rejected this rejection of the RSS. He said, okay, the RSS is far from perfect, but it's the only thing we have. It's like, the comparison he made there was with the Bangladesh war in 1971. He said, okay, you see, there was plenty wrong with Indira Gandhi, but at that time, that's what we had. We had Indira Gandhi, and she won the war. And so, you see, whatever was wrong with the RSS, he thought, well, at the moment, we are in no position to reject them. Okay, next. Background ideology. So Ram Swarup was absent in current events, like the Ayodhya movement, he would not take part in it in any way. Nevertheless, he documented the background ideology that has caused this problem. Which, you may call Islamic supremacism. It is that which had told Muslims to go break the places of worship of other religions, not only Hinduism. And so Swarup made a study of the Islamic sources and how they told followers how to treat or mistreat the followers of other religions, the unbelievers. For example, we have a book of which the original title, which you don't see here, was Understanding Islam Through Hadith, 1982. So it is as a new title, Understanding the Hadith, the sacred traditions of Islam. In which he explains, you see, that many of the doings of the Taliban and the Hamas and the ISIS and so on go back straight to Muhammad himself, or given the topicality at the moment of Ayodhya and Kashi, how the breaking of places of worship of other religions has been pioneered by Muhammad himself. The Kaaba, to which Muslims go on pilgrimage, the Kaaba in Mecca was originally a pagan place of worship, which housed 360 murtis. And so it is described as a very decisive moment in the history of Islam that Muhammad himself, when coming from Medina, he conquered Mecca, that he went to the Kaaba and broke the 360 idols with his own hands. And so that is indeed the precedent. All Muslim temple destroyers, Aurangzeb and Mahmud Ghaznavi and so on, they cite this example. This is the precedent that they follow. And in Islamic law, effectively, the precedent of the Prophet is decisive. You see, in a fatwa, in a theological judgment, what they always do is they first cite precedents of earlier Muslim leaders, and then finally, as absolutely decisive, the precedent of the Prophet. What did the Prophet do in a particular situation? Like, for example, we're going to see shortly the face of Arun Shauri, one of the great intellectuals in India, who also worked with Ram Swarup and Sita Goel. He wrote a book, The World of Fatwas, in which you see a few practical examples, and they're rather hilarious, of how this works. So in Islam, they always try to do things the way the Prophet did them. Like, for example, people ask some expert, what is the Islamic way for a man to urinate? And so, there is quite a jurisprudence about this. And so there are a number of descriptions of what Muhammad did in different situations. And so sometimes he would urinate while standing up, as they do in the West all the time. But that was always in special circumstances, when he had back pain or something. But the normal thing for him was to squat and urinate. So that's the Islamic way of urinating. Yes. So, for everything, you see, there is an Islamic way of doing things. And that is given by the example of the Prophet. This book, Understanding Islam Through Hadith, was thought to be banned Syed Shahabuddin, one of the Muslim leaders at the time, leader of one of the two movements for the Babri Masjid. He tried to get this book banned. It went to court, but mostly the case was won by Alok Kumar, who was their lawyer. Now I think he's one of the leaders of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. So they had to draw a few phrases from the book, otherwise the book was not banned. The whole thing is discussed in a book that might interest you, Freedom of Expression, by Sita Goel, with a number of contributions, including one of my own. As for Hinduism, critics allege that his view of Hinduism was too rosy. He discusses very thoroughly the philosophical aspects of Hinduism, but he has no eye for the social aspects. Him not being a married man didn't have to deal with the social aspects so much. But so once you do that, you have to deal with caste in the first place, with marriage rules and so on. And then you see there are a few aspects of Hinduism that come in for criticism. Maybe wrongly, I don't know, but that are being criticized a lot of the time. So those things don't figure in his work. Then Sitaram Goel, yes, next page indeed. He was born in Chhara in Haryana, also not far from here, and he died in 2003. He was also a Gandhian activist in his own day, but then he became a communist. And he had wanted to become a card-carrying member, but the day itself, when he wanted to go to the party office, he got word that it was a bad time because just then, Sardar Patel, as Home Minister, had decided to crack down on the Communist Party. So he was told to wait a little while, and that was long enough for him to change his mind under the influence of Ram Swarup. So then that's not mentioned here. It's important. Then he set up in Kolkata the Society for the Defense of Freedom in Asia, which was an anti-communist think tank, and that published a number of studies about the Soviet Union and Communist China at the time. So this was the most important anti-communist think tank outside of the West. In that connection, he was also a candidate for the Swatantra Party. I guess maybe some people from the political science department know it, but most of you will never have heard of it. The Swatantra Party was a rightist anti-communist party in the 1950s and 60s. It was supported by most of the Maharajas at the time. This is the reason why Indira Gandhi in about 1970 scrapped the status of the Maharajas. You see, when India was unified in 1947, acceded to India, that then they would retain their privileges and so on. So that promise was broken by Indira Gandhi precisely because they supported the opposition. And so in 1967, the opposition scored a big victory, though not yet enough to dislodge Congress from power. And so then she reacted this way. So he was a candidate for the Swatantra Party from Khajuraho. Unfortunately, he didn't win. But you see, he was put as a candidate because they had hoped that he'd be elected And he counted as the only man in India who could stand up to Nehru. You see, Nehru was a very bad administrator, but he was a great orator. He was a very powerful speaker. Like I'm sure you all know his independence speech. A day comes which comes but rarely in history, when we step from the old into the new, when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. Okay. So he could stand up to Nehru, but unfortunately he never made it to parliament. In 1962, he founded a commercial enterprise, the Biblia Intex, initially book business, later also publishing house. And then it is in that context, in the margin, when he got older, and so he left the business to his sons, then he himself started this Voice of India. And so it is in that context that he published a towering contribution. Yeah, he was, of course, initially a historian, which, professionally he could never exercise in any university. But he made a towering contribution to the Ayodhya debate, namely the two Hindu temples, what happened to them. Next. Yes. This is really not part of the story, but I found an old photograph, and simply for documentary, archival purposes, I mention it here. This is some debate in which he took part long ago. It's apparently an RSS meeting because there's a big picture in the background of Dindayal Upadhyay, the founder of the party ideology. And presiding over the conference is K.R. Malkani, who was also some RSS big wig. Sobarajee is sitting here on the left, and the right. So the third person from the left behind the table is Khan, who was a very important Muslim leader leading the Tabligh movement. Tabligh is Urdu for propaganda. And so the goal of the movement was to liberate the Muslims from non-Muslim influences, to make the Muslims more Muslim. I mean, there are all these sentimental secularist articles once in a while about some Muslim who is the caretaker of a Hindu temple or something. They say, oh, this is communal harmony and so on. But it's precisely that kind of syncretism between Islam, or between Muslims and non-Muslims, that movement tried to counter. You see, I mean, in the Quran it is said that you should not take unbelievers as your friends. And so that is what they wanted to put into practice. Okay. So Ayodhya. You might not know everything that happened back then. Given your very desirable young age. So you weren't around when in 1983 the Rama's birthplace liberation movement was founded by three politicians, two from Congress, one from the Hindu Mahasabha. So one from the BJP, I hasten to add, because, recently there has been big propaganda, oh, it's thanks to the BJP that now you have an Ayodhya temple and so on. That is not true, in fact. And we'll see who is there to make it happen. Then in 1986, the court throws open the doors to the temple. So at that time, there was a mosque building standing that was used since 1949 as a Hindu temple. In 1936, the British had closed the building So there was no Muslim worship going on, no Hindu worship either. Then in 49, Hindus installed the murtis, and so worship started, but there was only a priest allowed to go in to perform the rituals. Ordinary people could not go in. So in 1986, the court decided that they could go in. So from then on, it was a temple, even though still in a mosque building. And then there was agitation for building an actual temple. So in 1989, the Jawaharlal Nehru University historians published a statement denying that there had been a temple there. And so until then, most people, including the Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, were working towards a scenario where the place would be handed over to Hindus for building a temple. From then on, that became more controversial. And in fact, the whole controversy is largely thanks to this statement. Sometimes intellectuals do have influence, even if in this case quite negative. Then in 1992, the structure was demolished. Yes. So I was just coming from Brussels. I arrived one day too late on the 7th of December, 1992. But nevertheless, when I heard of this demolition, personally, I thought it was not a bad thing, because at least it created the opportunity to build the temple, because nobody at that point had the courage to do what was materially necessary, namely take away the mosque building. In the newspapers, it has been described as, you see, Hindus have built a temple, on the place where an ancient mosque was standing. Now that ancient mosque, of course, they should say that mosque itself was standing on the place of an older temple. That, of course, now we know that the news reporting has systematically been put under the carpet. But you see, even that expression about the mosque, ancient mosque, that makes you think of, Ajanta and Ellora, or, so ancient, the Acropolis in Athens or so. Now, really, you see, even for lovers of mosque architecture, this was a very banal, ordinary building with nothing to be proud about. Anyway, so it was demolished, and then the BJP pulled his hands off from it. So they had been involved in the Ayodhya movement between 1989, June 89, and October also 1991. They had picked the fruits, the harvest of the Ayodhya movement. Mainly they had won the elections in 1989 and in 1991, growing from 2 seats in parliament to 120 seats and becoming the official opposition, the largest opposition party. But otherwise, that has been their only involvement. And so then they withdrew, and the whole thing was then taken care of by the courts, by the judiciary. And so the Uttar Pradesh High Court took the trouble of looking into the evidence. So in 1991, there had been a scores debate for which a lot of evidence had been collected. And that was without any result. Nobody looked at it, mainly because the other party hadn't participated. The Babri Masjid Action Committee had initially sent a few people, many historians, who didn't know at all how to deal with evidence or what counted as evidence. who made fool of themselves. Then Irfan Habib, a Marxist, explicitly Marxist historian from Aligarh Muslim University, collected a number of real historians to represent them, but they also didn't show up. So it was a strange thing, and they never collected any evidence. So there was a lot of evidence for the existence of a temple, both documentary evidence and archaeological evidence. There was nothing in the other direction. But you see, initially, the leftist historians didn't think it was necessary to collect evidence because they thought, oh, you see, the other side are just amateurs and fanatics and nobody takes them serious and, they are not capable of collecting evidence. And when the evidence finally came to light, they had no answer, but they were still confident that somehow, nobody would be, foolish or fanatic enough to build this temple. Well, they were wrong, and so they were called to the witness stand by the court to give an account of, what, according to them, the history of the site was. And so they all fell through. They did not have any evidence. They had not tried to collect evidence, and they had to admit, we have no case. So the evidence was accepted. There were archaeological excavations in 2003. We brought the whole temple to light, or at least its foundations, or many of its remains, many temple sculptures. So about the existence of the temple, there is no doubt at all. And so in 2010, the court judged, that the site should be left to Hindus, which in 2019 was confirmed by the Supreme Court. This is the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. Next. So the Vishwa Hindu Parishad was led at that time by Ashok Singhal, who you see here with the microphone. Actually, in 1964, this organization had been founded as a subsidiary of the RSS, and Sita Goel had been asked to be its first president, but he refused because, you see, he asked the RSS, okay, can I make statements of my own? No, we make the statements, you can read off the statements that we have prepared, okay? Now, that was not for Goel. So it was the most explicitly pro-Hindu faction or tentacle of the RSS family. That's when the demolition came, they opposed the demolition. You see, the demolition was really something that came from the ground up, that was done by the Karsevaks, the activists, and so this was ordinary boys who had worked for Ayodhya and who didn't take it, that their leaders were suddenly soft-pedaling the whole issue and delaying. So they demolished the whole thing, as you know. So the BJP, for the short time that they were involved, had this big road show of the Rath Yatra, which was a Toyota car dressed up like Rama's chariots. And so this was Ayodhya. But that road show was stopped, and many activists were shot by Mulayam Singh Yadav in November 1990. I don't know if you people follow the news, but some time ago, a year ago or so, a prize was given, a Bharat Ratna, I think, some big award, posthumous award was given to Mulayam Singh Yadav, precisely the very fellow who had shot the Ayodhya activists. Anyway, so one of the great producers of a pro-Ayodhya argumentation was Arun Shourie. I don't know if the present generation still knows who Arun Shourie is. He is still alive, but not much in the limelight anymore. One of the most productive Indian intellectuals. So he's quite independent. I mean, he's quite critical of Hinduism also. His first book was called Hinduism, Essence and Consequence, which is about, all the usual criticisms of Hinduism, about sati and caste and all the rest. Or Two Saints, which is a book about Ramakrishna and about Ramana Maharshi, where he says, well, strictly speaking, we don't really know what they were. Who says that they were enlightened? Who says that they were clairvoyant? And so on. So this does not go down well with some Hindus. However, it's also a crusader against reservations. I mean, it's very funny when I see these recent actions for reservations for Jats and for Marathas and so on. It's so retrogressive. I mean, my own ancestors were also they have after a few generations worked themselves up. My father was the first one of the family to go to university. But so all this social transformation in the West happened without reservations. There is no good reason for having reservations. And so I don't think it's a good idea to have them in India either. And even Dr. Ambedkar was against it. He was willing to accept the principle for 10 years. Now, instead of being limited to 10 years, they have only grown from strength to strength and they are now all over the place. And the end is not in sight yet. So he became the crusader against this. He also wrote a book about Ambedkar, bringing him back down to earth. I mean, Ambedkar is now a godlike figure in India, and he has statues everywhere, and so on. And so he criticized Ambedkar. The book starts with asking, where was Ambedkar during the Quit India movement? This was some Gandhian agitation against the British in 1942. Where was Dr. Ambedkar? Well, he was the labor minister of the cabinet of the viceroy. He was part of the colonial establishment. All right? So he was not a freedom fighter. On the contrary, he very explicitly was against independence. He did not want the British to leave. Now, maybe he had good reasons for that, but at any rate, that ought to be known. Right? And so Ambedkar right now, especially now, is a figure that you can't touch. And so Shourie did criticize Ambedkar. The eminent historians who had written that there never was a temple there and who had written that there was never a Hindu-Muslim conflict and so on, they also came in for his criticism in the book Eminent Historians. And so it is he who did the opening shot in the evidence debate with his article, Hybrid Communalism. The article is about the fact that there exists plenty of Islamic evidence for the existence of the temple. And the Babri Masjid was for a very long time called not Babri Masjid, but Masjid-i Jannastan, Mosque of the Birthplace. And then he shows in that article also four different cases where Islamic institutions have tried to make this evidence disappear. And so it was, it was really an opening shot. It was a spectacular article. So then the whole debate about the evidence started. Yes. Within the Voice of India, next, within Voice of India, also next, yes, this one. A number of other and surprising books have been published. There is a claim in theological and so on writings that Voice of India is more or less the publishing house of the RSS. This is not true at all. And so there are a number of critical books of the RSS that have been published by the Voice of India. For example, this book by Abhas Kumar Chatterjee, The Concept of Illumination. So this man, Abhas Kumar Chatterjee, also provided important evidence, the testimony in the 18th century of life in Ayodhya by Joseph T. Tower, a Jesuit father of Austria. But so he writes that the site at that time was in fact a Hindu site, even though there was some Muslim mosque standing. It was actually the site of Hindu festivals, and no Muslims are mentioned at all. In fact, the same thing was the case under Akbar, immediately after Akbar. Akbar, who had restored the Hindu temples, so had allowed Hindus to build back their demolished temples. And so in the case of Ayodhya, the temple was not being rebuilt, but the mosque that had been built over the temple was restored to the Hindus. So they had their mosque and they could use it as a temple. And that's what they did. Okay, nevertheless, Bill is very critical of the RSS and BJP. And so we also published this book, Sang Parivar, where a number of Hindu activists, including disappointed people disappointed with the Sang, who used to be part of it, give their own viewpoint. There's also a book of my own, in that context, BJP versus Hindu insurgents, which contains my own criticism of the BJP in this case. Like, for example, do you know what the flag of the BJP is? Yes, the lotus, and what colors? Well, yeah, saffron, but that's not all. You see, it also has a green band next to it. Originally, it was saffron. You see, originally the party was called Jan Sangh, founded in 1951. And then in 1977, when some alliance was formed against Indira Gandhi, it merged into the Janata Party. So the party, as a separate entity, disappeared. And then it was refounded in 1980 as the BJP. Now, all the comments about the BJP are totally anachronistic. You see, the whole, all this India watching outside, India, but also inside India, most of the secularists writing about the BJP is completely anachronistic. I assure you, in 20 or so years' time, when the present power equation has lapsed, as it inevitably will, the academic and journalistic writing about the Hindu movement will count as a classic case of academic malpractice. This will be studied for how not to do things. And so it is completely anachronistic. You know, they attribute all kinds of positions taken by the founder of the party, Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, in the early 1950s. It projects those positions on the Modi government today. Back then, it was very much a Hindu party. Of that, nothing is there anymore since the refounding of the party in 1980. You see, this talk about Hindu Rashtra and about having Sanskrit instead of English and so on, that's all gone. That's not even in theory present anymore. And so one thing that they changed was the party flag, which originally was indeed saffron. And then they made it saffron and green. Now, I have nothing against the green color. You know, green, you could see as the sign of greenery, of nature, you know, of ecological consciousness and so on. I'm not against that. Gaddafi of Libya made the national flag of Libya green, nothing else, just green. And so that could be a reference to Islam, but actually it's a desert country, and he played an enormous role in making that country fertile, you know, and that's the natural meaning of green. Now, here in the case of the BJP flag or of the Indian national flag, which also is one third green, this has a completely communal color. Green means Islam. And so in the case of the BJP, they have the same thing. They put in green because they want to say, oh, no, we are in favor of Islam. And so recently Mohan Bhagwat said, yeah, you see, Hinduism cannot be complete without Islam. I mean, come on. So, you know, so the Christians were not good Hindus because there is no Islam in their message. Well, okay. Next. So Goel also published some other scholars like Harsh Narayan, who wrote a book about jizya, that is the tax that Hindus have to pay in order to be allowed to remain Hindus. Or indeed the Temple Mosque Dispute, a book focusing on the Muslim sources confirming that there had been a temple there. Similarly, there was a historian K.S. Lau. K.S. Lau is best known. He wrote a number of very good books about the role, for example, of Islam in the creation of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in India. But so he's best known for suggesting a figure for the number of Hindus that have been killed by Islamic rule, namely between 1000 and 1525. So it's not complete. It doesn't start at the very beginning and it doesn't end at the very end. But for that period alone, some 80 million Hindus. Now, even in the 20th century, it's not negligible. In the partition, some 2 million people were killed in Bangladesh before the country was liberated by the Indian Army in 1971. The Pakistani government killed some 3 million people, mainly Hindus, as per the Bangladesh government itself. Okay, then the importance of the book Hindu temples, what happened to them, is mainly that it drew attention to the ideological underpinning of the destruction of temples. So it shows that this was very much the realization of an ideological program that was already present in the Quran. There have been attempts to deny this temple destruction. This is like totally ridiculous. In many of the cases involved, you can still find the ruins of the temple. Often mosques have been built over them, but keeping some of the ruins visible. The best known case is the Gyan Mosque in Kashi or Varanasi, which is nowadays in the news. So there, even though now you see they try to make it scientific by bringing archaeological, evidence, but in fact, just with the naked eye, any amateur can see that this mosque was built on a destroyed temple, because part of the temple walls are still part of the mosque. Anyway, so the second line of defense is to admit the temple destructions, but to blame the Hindus for it. Yeah. So this Richard Eaton, an American self-described Marxist historian, says that Muslims only did this in imitation of what Hindus did. Now, this is totally silly. There are a few cases, not the thousands, as happened with the temple destructions, but there are a few cases of Hindu priests abducting murtis. They didn't destroy the temples, they didn't destroy the murtis, certainly not. But they celebrated a military victory by taking the main murti from the loser. Now, what happened in those cases? You see, you take Shiva from a Shiva temple and you spirit it away to another Shiva temple, namely your own. And in both places, the Shiva worship continues. Here with the stolen murti, and over there they have to make a new murti. But at any rate, this is just a material object. But the religion simply continues. Absolutely nothing changes in the status of the religion. Whereas what Muslims did was an attempt to destroy the religion. They didn't care about these buildings, they cared about Hinduism. It is Hinduism that had to be destroyed. So it's totally wrong to equate these two phenomena. Secondly, it is also completely ridiculous to claim that Muslims did something because they wanted to imitate Hindus. No, they wanted to imitate Muhammad. And there is absolutely no case at all where a Muslim says, I did this because I wanted to do like what, Hema Chandra or Prithvi Raja, any Hindu king did. Then there is a great book by Meenakshi Jain, Flight of Deities and Rebirth of Temples, where she shows the enormous attachment of Hindus to their murtis, how they try to save them. And so often when they saw Islamic armies coming, they took the murti away and hid it in a place or buried it in the ground, or if they really had to hide, they threw it in the river. And so very regularly, even today, you see in diggings, like when they build a new building, they first have to dig a big hole in the ground. So often, these Hindu natives come to light. Now, for the BJP, this Ayodhya event was a mere toy, something to make themselves interesting and win the elections with, which is exactly what they have done. And so in 1989, in 1991, and maybe again in 2024. Because you see, the opening of the Ayodhya temple on 22nd of January certainly has enhanced the BJP's popularity. So for them, it was merely an instrument, but for Goel, it was the key to the whole religion of Islam. You can only understand Islam if you understand the phenomenon of temple destructions, of which Ayodhya is absolutely not the only case. And so the BJP has in its explanation always downplayed the role of Islam. Like, they say all the time, like now again in the Organizer, which is the RSS newspaper, their comment about the consecration of the Rama statue on 22 January, they give this a long article where the word Hindu is not mentioned, and where the word Islam is not mentioned. And so they speak about the fallen revered Baba. Right? Now, yes, he was fallen, he came from Uzbekistan, but it's not because he was fallen that he destroyed temples. Tipu Sultan was not fallen. Last month I worked in Chanakya University in Bangalore. That's just next to the birthplace of Tipu Sultan. So he was very much an Indian, but nevertheless he destroyed temples. And so that had just nothing to do with it. The Greeks came into India, the Huns and the Kushanas and so on came into India. They didn't destroy temples. On the contrary, they built them. And they became Hindus or Buddhists also, and they very much participated in the native culture. They didn't try to destroy it. The British, the British were very harmful to India. They destroyed India's economy, they destroyed its education system. Nevertheless, they did not destroy temples. On the contrary, they discovered the Artha Shastra and translated it and so on. They did all kinds of things for the native culture. They deciphered the Brahmi script and the Ashoka inscriptions. They discovered the whole Harappan civilization, Mohenjo-daro and all the rest. So you see, you can be foreign and not be involved in temple destruction. That's just not the point. And so that's one way of trying to hide the just factor in there. Myself, of course, I've also published with Voice of India. Especially, I would draw attention to my 2002 book, Ayodhya, the case against the temple. This, of course, puts readers on the wrong foot because they think that this book is against the Ayodhya temple. It is not. But it draws attention to the fact that the evidence is always on the side in favor of the temple. And so I am asking the question, where is the case against the temple? And so there you see the so-called eminent historians had created a lot of noise, but there was no case against the temple. And so that's the case I argue here. And then in 2023, last year, my probably final book about Ayodhya was published by another publishing house called Ayodhya. Then Sita Goel was very critical of the RSA BJP, but for the larger Hindu quarrels, he sometimes helped them. And for example, he published as a book the evidence that the scholars had brought together in 1991 under the title of History versus Casuistry, evidence of the Rama Janmabhoomi presented by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad to the government of India. Here I have played myself maybe the whole narrative that strings together all these pieces of evidence has been well entrusted to Sita and Goel, but he asked me to write it, so that's what I done. And then the BJP published a white paper on Ayodhya in 1993. That was actually full of mistakes, straightened out by Goel. So, Voice of India played a crucial role in collecting the Ayodhya evidence. And the evidence itself was very important, was crucial in getting the courts to awarding the temple site to the Hindu camp, not to the Muslims. So, if the temple could be built, it is not thanks to the BJP, it is thanks to the decision of the court, which itself is a consequence of the scholar's evidence. So, you see, it was often said that with the building of the Ayodhya temple, Hindus have taken revenge on what Muslims have done to them. No, that's not true. Revenge is something else. Revenge is, for example, if you go to Mecca and destroy the Kaaba, that would be revenge. So that's not the case at all. We're talking about restoration. And, there's nothing hostile in that or nothing anti-Muslim in that. And you see, I was at the Prana Pratishtha myself, and so Modi gave a speech there, and I don't like Modi's policies, but admittedly, he was a very good speaker. It was just electrifying. Everybody was so enthusiastic. And so what I did not like about the speech, or what I found strange, is that he didn't use the word Hindu even once. Okay? He said that Rama had the capacity of uniting India and so on. I'm not too sure what the non-Hindu think about that. Just don't know. I mean, apparently there are Muslims who have joined in the celebrations, but certainly there are some who haven't. So that's typically RSS. The word Hindu is systematically replaced with the word Indian. Like, for instance, I wrote this, well, originally my PhD thesis called Decolonizing the Hindu Mind. So, when I was in Varanasi, I had agreed with some association there to give a speech about decolonizing the Hindu mind. Well, when I arrived there, I saw that they had changed the title in Decolonizing the Indian Mind. Now, that's not the same thing. And you see, this concern about decolonizing is typically Hindu. I've never heard Indian Christians talk like that. That's not what interests them. But so, nevertheless, it is important to say that there is no anti-Muslim intention involved. And so this is something I found quite good and wise about Modi's speech in Ayodhya, that the word Muslim was also not mentioned. The temple had been destroyed, well, actually several times. You see, there was already a temple, before the year 1000. It was destroyed in 1030. That's the first Ramzan destruction. Most people don't know about it. So it has been destroyed several times by Muslims and in the name of Islam, because justification Islam. Now that was never mentioned, and that made good sense. You see, since the return of Rama, it is not important anymore what had happened to his birthplace temple before. And so it's good, it's wise to just drop this communal angle completely. That I absolutely applaud. That's something very good he has done. So, you see, the job of the historian is simply to make sure that we don't forget. The job of a politician may be to take revenge or not to. And in this case, I applauded that there is no talk of revenge in this case. But so these are two separate concerns, about whether to forgive or not is a moral and political decision to take. But whether to forget or not, you see, that's a scholarly decision to take. And of course, we shouldn't forget what happened. And that, you see, we thank these two great people, Ram Sarup and Sita for. Thank you for your attention. And if there are any objections or questions, I would absolutely like to hear them. I guess somebody here is keeping time. Yeah.
Maybe I'll wait, I'll comment later.
Yeah.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for coming to our college. And secondly, my question is that how can the non-left wing or the right wing can carve its space in the academia, especially when it's immediate?
When what is medium?
How can the right wing
Yeah.
carve its space in the academia when it's not considered as reliable vis-a-vis the left?
I don't know if it's not reliable. I don't think the left is all that reliable. But it has captured the moral high ground, so it thinks, and many people who don't, who haven't studied it, don't know exactly, and so they see the left in power positions in academia. That is true. How to change that? Well, there are no shortcuts. You have to do the long march through the institutions. That's what the left has done. I don't know if you know that expression. So in the 60s, there was this leftist student revolt in Europe. And so one of the leaders, Rudi Dutschke from Germany, launched that phrase, the long march through the institutions, by which the left has gradually captured power. And so I'm afraid that there isn't really an alternative except dictatorship and throwing everybody out. But I don't advocate such a solution. But so the important thing is to spread the truth. And so you see, this is greatly advancing. Like just yesterday, I saw a book, I didn't know it had been written by Vikram Sampath about Kashi. Another one has been written by my good friend Meenakshi Jain. And so you see the attempt in 1989 to distort the history of Ayodhya, that cannot be repeated with Kashi or Mathura. You see, there the truth is so obvious. So there they might say, but let bygones be bygones. This is a position you could take, but there are no bygones. There was no temple destruction. That is now impossible to claim. So there you see a certain progress has been made, and therefore you see even the established people more and more have to take into account the true story as told by Hindus rather than advance some fraudulent version of history. But that's only part of it. You see, yes, you see, of course, the institutions have to change. So far, what change there is private initiative. Like where I just worked in the Chanakya University in Bengaluru, that's a private initiative. The whole thing was thought up by what's his name, Banavati, Vinaya Chandra Banavati, during the lockdown. He had nothing to do. He said, okay, let's devise a university. This was in answer to the new leftist university, the Ashoka University, built moreover exactly at Ram Sarup's birthplace. Um, and so, immediately he found a sponsor, some metal industrialist, and a certain Jindal, but not to be confused with the Jindal of Jindal University in Sonipat. And so that was built like in no time. So they're now in their second academic year, 3 years after it was thought up. You see, from China, you expect these things. So spectacular, because they're, in a dictatorship, you don't have to take the trouble of consulting people and so on. From India, I hadn't expected this at all. But so it turns out that, Indians do have a capacity to do spectacular things. Indeed, you see that there is a book written in 1910 or so by the German Count Hermann Kaiserling, Travel Diary of a Philosopher. And the part about India has been published in India in English translation. And so he remarks that the Indians are very like the Russian people, whom the German audience more or less knows. Namely, they're very religious, unlike Western Europe already at the time where religion was falling apart. And even though they're very chaotic, compared to the very organized Germans, they're very chaotic, and yet they managed to accomplish things unequaled. Like, for instance, the Russians, you see, are very confused people according to the Germans, nevertheless spread out all the way to Alaska, biggest country in the world, and so on. And so similarly, the Indians do great things, like, for example, the Kumbh Mela. The Kumbh Mela is the greatest gathering of human beings in the world. And the only thing that will surpass it, that will be an even bigger gathering, is the next Kumbh Mela. Yes? And yet you see the last few Kumbh Melas have gone, without any accidents, everything well organized, careful, even though extremely big. And yes, so you see, even building such a university in no time, also apparently is possible. Anyway, so these things are now happening. Sometimes you also get lucky, like the Nalanda University was built by the communists, by Amartya Sen. And initially, of course, he was a leftist bastion, which is strange because if you see the history of Nalanda, Nalanda is one of the great successes of the Islamic iconoclasts in that they destroyed it. Okay, it was the biggest university in the world. They destroyed it completely. They burned it down, not only the buildings and the books, but also the people working there. And so to have the goal of refounding that as a communist university, I mean, you have to give it to them, their effrontery. However, that was financially completely mismanaged. And so they left it over to the government, which was a Congress government at the time. What they had not foreseen is that a year later, the BJP would win the elections and therefore also take over this university. Okay, so, this has ceased to be a leftist bastion. But so, I mean, one after another, these things have to be taken on. BHU, that I know somewhat well, used to be a Hindu bastion since the 30s, and still fairly keeping that status. Then it was taken over by JNU originated vice chancellor who packed it with leftists. And so I mean, I found out because myself, I was invited to speak there and then disinvited, you know, cancelled. But you see, I was there now this year and it seems to have normalized somewhat, you know, return to common sense. But so, I mean, there are no shortcuts. But so what makes a difference is the involvement of the government, because there are certain things that private persons can't do that only the government can do. And so here the BJP has done something, but not enough. If it gets re-elected now, probably more will happen. I mean, I have the impression that finally, after 10 years or so, they have come to the realization that they have to do something for Hinduism also, not just for development. Right. Any other objection? Is there nobody who disagrees with me? No, really.
My question is regarding, can you please discuss instances where the Sun and BJP have shared common goals and areas where their ideology may have damaged?
Well, the RSS was a Hindu organization until very recently. You know, whether what they wanted to do for Hinduism was the right thing, that is a second question. But at any rate, about their Hindu nature, there was no doubt at all. Whereas the BJP started as a Hindu party, but already after the death of its founder, Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, the rot set in. And so some of the real Hindu leaders, like, what's his name again? No, in the 60s. Well, okay. In the 60s, there was Deen Dayal Upadhyay. Is not the name I was looking for, but anyway, Deen Dayal Upadhyay is worth mentioning. So he devised this ideology called integral humanism. And Ekatma Manavavad, and so integral humanism, that has become the official ideology of the RSS and BJP. Worth mentioning because strangely, in like at least 90%, maybe 95% of publications about the RSS or the BJP, this is not mentioned. You see, you imagine a book about the British Labour Party not mentioning the word socialism. You know, unthinkable. Yet in India, it is the done thing to not mention, to very perforce, absolutely not mention the official ideology of the ruling party. Why? Well, because it sounds so innocuous, you know. Integral humanism, who could be against that? What is wrong with that? You know, if you want to push the idea, oh, it's a fascist party, you know, then this term won't do. So that's hidden. Now, I'm quite in favor of this ideology. However, the reason why the party leadership at the time was in favor of it, we speak of 1964, is, I think, less commendable. You see, party leaders like Atal Bihari Vajpayee was already a big name at the time, and Nanaji Deshmukh, they were already in favor of a complete de-Hinduization of the party. They, like the word development, which Modi likes to use, you know, Vikas, that was already the big slogan of this Nanaji Deshmukh. And so what they liked about integral humanism is that it didn't mention the word Hindu. even though you could construe integral humanism as a sort of modern version of a modern translation of the word dharma. Actually, contents-wise, it's not un-Hindu, but at least it avoids the word Hindu. So that's what they liked about it. And so the word Hindu, hello, Manushi. So the word Hindu was systematically scrapped. And so when the BJP was then founded in 1980, nothing Hindu. And then they got 2 seats because nobody was interested in this party. Then, because of the Ayodhya movement, which others had started, the BJP jumped onto the bandwagon, and then they found that this was quite a vote getter. And so then they got first 85 votes, and then in 1991 they got 120, not votes, but seats in parliament. And so then you see they re-identified as a Hindu party, at least during the election campaigns. Then in the elections of 2004, and this has been filmed, a meeting between Arun Jaitley, who at that time had been the law minister in the Vajpayee cabinet, with the American ambassador. You see, the American ambassador said, yes, you people have, privatized the economy and, it's all very good, but, this Hindu fanaticism we don't like. And Arun Jaitley said, yeah, but, that's not really there. It's only in the elections to get votes, but after that we forget about it. Which was true, which was a very honest, exact description of their attitude. And it has only gotten worse since then. In 2014, they didn't want Modi as their prime ministerial candidate because he was too strongly identified as Hindu. Now, mind you, people in Gujarat have told me that even as the chief minister of Gujarat, he did nothing particularly pro-Hindu. He gave no trouble to the Christian missionaries or so. No. And he had, of course, not organized the riots in which some Muslims were killed, which were caused by a pogrom committed by Muslims themselves in Godra. But so, he had done nothing anti-Muslim, that's fine. He doesn't have to, I don't think he should be anti-Muslim. Nevertheless, the fact that he had refused to wear a Muslim skull cap when the audience demanded that of him, that gave him the image of being a fanatic Hindu. Okay? Even in the economists and so on abroad, they had heard of this incident and this was made much of. So, he had the reputation of being the Hindu Hardaya Samrat. But, there was nothing much Hindu Samrat about him. He was a good administrator, that but there was nothing explicitly pro-Hindu about him. However, when the BJP leadership had to make a choice between Rajnath Singh, the other ex-party president, and railway minister, transport minister, come on. Gadkari, yes, exactly. And then Modi, the party leadership absolutely did not want Modi because he was too identified as Hindu. And then the rank and file preferred Modi. And so then they saw, well, if we want to win elections and that's what we want, then maybe we'll have to take Modi. That's how Modi became prime minister. But then Modi himself, once in power, again, backpedaled on this Hindu thing. The less of it, the better. So that's the BJP, Now the RSS remained the Hindu conscience of the BJP for a while. Like in 2004, they caused the electoral defeat of Vajpayee by not working for the elections. I mean, you know, elections, contain a lot of legwork. People have to, go around and spread the message. And so the BJP used to use the RSS foot soldiers as its own, instrument for doing this job. Now, in 2004, the RSS refused precisely because Vajpayee had not done anything pro-Hindu. And in fact, the story is in 2004, with the elections coming near, one of his lieutenants, he's from Mumbai. What's his name again? He died. He was murdered, I think. Yes, Pramod Mahajan. He had said, now you have to do something very conspicuously pro-Hindu if you want to win the elections. Okay? And so the excuse was always, yeah, but we have the allies and they don't want it. At the time, the BJP still did not have the majority on its own. And so then Mahajan said, yeah, but you see, now, the elections are near. You have to really show a Hindu face. So you make an explicitly pro-Hindu proposal. If the allies don't want it, then you make a big show of it. You do a big conflict in the cabinet with the allies. If necessary, the government falls. But then you can go to the elections with the aura of, we have defended Hindu interests. We haven't succeeded. Please give us a real majority, then we'll do it. Or if they come around, then too you can go to the public and say, see, we have achieved this pro-Hindu reform. And Vajpayee refused. So he went to the elections as a secularist. And the result is that he lost. You see, so these secularists are perfectly willing to risk losing if only they can keep their secularist image. And so that remains the main mentality in the BJP, as was demonstrated very crashingly in the Nupur Sharma affair. Remember that? So in 2022, there was something about the Kashi Vishwanath. They discovered, let's say, an object which some people said was Shiva Lingam, and other people gave a more material explanation. So there was a TV debate about it, and some Muslim spokesman, Taslim Rahmani, used the occasion to make fun of the whole idea of Shiva Lingam. As I suppose you all know, Shiva Lingam means the phallus of Shiva. And so that is, even among Hindus, jokes are made about it. And so he made jokes about it on TV. And then this Nupur Sharma was there as the spokeswoman of the BJP. And so she said, yeah, if you want to talk like this, we can also talk like this about Muhammad. And then she gave the story straight from Islamic scripture. She didn't invent anything. That, as a 54 or so year old, he married this child, Aisha, who was still playing with dolls and so on. And so this was simply true. And then the BJP chairman, JP Nadda, threw her out. Sacked her first of all as spokeswoman, and threw her out of the party because in Qatar someone had protested against this. Now, come on, what is this? They threw her under the bus, so to speak. And then, because a number of people had on Twitter, supported her, done nothing except support Nupur Sharma, they were murdered. You see, there were many demonstrations with the Urdu slogan, Gustakhi Rasul ki ek hi saza, Sartan se Judah, you know, for the insult of the prophet, there is only one punishment, severing the head from the trunk. And then you see 7 people were murdered, of whom 3, I think, were effectively beheaded, which is the punishment prescribed by the prophet for those cases. And so you see, the BJP, who was on the side of the terrorists, was not supporting their own spokeswoman. Now, I mean, that is totally unforgivable. You can't get away with this. But yes, they did. But so that's the story of the BJP. Now, what is the RSS doing vis-a-vis this? So in 2004, the RSS would have taken a pro-Hindu stance. Now that's gone under the present Sarsanga Chalak, Mohan Bhagwat. He goes around saying things like there are no Hindus, all Indians are Hindus. OIC is a Hindu. And then, there is no real Hindu conflict because we all have the same DNA. Now, you see, being a Hindu or being a patriot for that matter is not a matter of genes or genetics. I mean, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, okay, were cousins, same DNA, but they fought a war nevertheless. I mean, it's just totally beside the point, I mean, Malik Kafur, for instance, another great temple destroyer, he was a born Hindu, but he was a slave at the Muslim court, and then he rose through the ranks somehow. I mean, of course, he knew all the ins and outs of the palace, so he committed a palace revolution. Then he became the Sultan. And so he destroyed all these Hindu temples and killed Hindus and so on, even though he had the same DNA. So that's not the point at all. And so you see right now the RSS is obfuscating, is escaping the real issue, is talking around it and so on. So now there is not much difference anymore. So what Hindus should do is to do what the RSS was meant to do, namely to form some kind of lobby group that acts as the Hindu conscience, and that thereby manages to influence the BJP and bring it back to the Hindu path. Yes, any other objection? Yeah, I mean, either nobody said, but Dr. Ellis, how can you be so wrong? Come on. Yeah. No, that's better. Yeah, microphone. Oh.
Sorry for journey or direction. There are two things that come to the mind. One is that I remember was that is around the Ayodhya issue by Congress and
Yeah.
And there was a very powerful that is speak within freedom movement also. And that united the Congress and many other organizations. But only later part of this movement mentioned that also called secularists really jumped in the fray and started falsifying his claim. Then the matter of and when you started this tax itself, including later, and now from now onwards, when this temple has been restored and proper things have happened, where do you see this entire nationalist, street in India's political force moving with direction?
Yes.
Because that's a long history.
Mhm.
Going back, in fact, some scholars are pointing out that it all started in 1860s.
Mhm.
The type of power balance
Yeah.
started in the years. Social configuration. Particularly expressed by the major
Mhm.
social groups, influence and influence.
Yeah.
That power balance, which at times sometimes tilted in favor of people, sometimes but Muslims, did get resolved even after the time of partition. So that's what time we made. So in between we have seen many twists and turns.
Mhm.
From now on, where do you see this entire thing moving?
Yeah.
One. Second thing, what comes to my mind, that if I'm correct, perhaps more Dr. This is more of decolonizing in mind. And you rightly pointed out that these days we are hearing about the decolonization of India, decolonizing Indian. The distinction is being made from the Hindu mind and Indian mind. And I find that a new crop of scholarship emerging are not directly aligned with the BJP RSS, but picking up this issue in a big way. And you have mentioned rightly one name, Vikram Sambal,
Mhm.
another is Sai Deepak,
Yeah.
and there are many more which are coming
Mhm.
in the space now. So therefore, this new journey which is happening, the decolonization, and there is no, definitive line which can be drawn on this question of decolonization.
Mhm.
Because you were referring to Modi's this speech in Ayodhya when the Trump published. And if I remember correctly, he talked about 1,000 years of colonization.
Yeah.
So I mean, he drew a line. Now I'm hearing many, Dalit ideologues. They are talking about 2,000 years of colonization, particularly going by Ambedkar's Ambedkarite tradition and saying the part of this, Sudras and Dalits after, particularly 300 AD or so. Then if you talk to a tribal, they talk of 3,000 years of it,
Mhm.
right? So in fact, in India, they have multiple discourses of decolonization.
Yeah.
Right? So, but till 50 years ago, people were very clear that when you talked about decolonization, it was only the British colonization.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So from British colonization,
Mhm.
come to the 1,000 years colonization. Now it is getting further extended to 2,000 years, then the 3,000 years.
Yeah.
Really, one does know when this decolonization, will started.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion, which way you find this contemporary journey?
Yes. Okay. Let's start with colonization. Now, having myself contributed to the very common use of the word colonization, I must say that now I wouldn't do that anymore because you see, there way too much talk about decolonization. You see, it's the attitude of an adolescent son who is in rebellion against his father. You see, in this case, you have been independent for 77 years. And so it's a bit, what are we talking about? Decolonization. People like Ram Swarup and Sita Goel had been themselves active in the process that led to decolonization. Okay? They never talked about decolonization. For them, decolonization is what had happened in 1947. And after that, you see, India was its own master and it had its own problems and so on, but they were not in the nature of decolonization. For instance, if I am now speaking English to you, I mean, I alter, Hindi, And, that would, I mean, like most Deliwalas, I can speak Hindi with a chai wala, but once it gets serious, I switch to English. I'm sorry. But so why is that? Because Indians have decided to keep treating the colonial language as the language for grown-ups, for the courts, for the government, and so on. Um, if you go to a university and you want to study history, yeah, that you can do in Hindi, but nobody wants to be a historian. If you want to please your parents and become an engineer, now that's in English. Okay? So such decisions about, what language to use have not been imposed upon you by the British or by anyone outside. That's Indians who have taken this decision. And so to construe them in terms of colonial and so on, it's just wrong. Then, secondly, to speak about earlier pre-British colonizations is in fact correct. The successive Muslim regimes started as colonial regimes. The problem for them was that they lost their homeland. You see, it is often said, yeah, but you see, the Mughals did not take any wealth out of India the way the British did. Exactly, that is true, because the British had a homeland to which they could take the riches too. Uzbekistan, which was the homeland of the Mughals, was lost to them. And they always tried to recover that because they did feel that that was their homeland. They never spoke an Indian language. If you wanted to work for the British East India Company or later the British Indian government, you had to take a full course of Hindustani in Urdu, in Arabic script, before you cracked into India. You had to be fluent in Hindi before you came to India. And so, the Mughal regime was far more colonial regime. However, they had to keep the wealth in India because there was nowhere else to go. And yes, there was a transfer of wealth, mainly from Hindus to Muslims. But at least the wealth remained inside the country, like to build the Taj Mahal, you had to employ thousands of Hindus who thereby had a livelihood. So for instance, the participation of Hindus or India in the world economy, went a bit down, but not much. And so India was still the richest country in the world during the Mughal period. Whereas under the British, they really hurt India's economy. And Nehru and Indira did so even more, by the way. But on the strength of an English ideology, which they had learned, sorry, Professor Lohia, but which Nehru had learned in Cambridge. You know. This whole socialist economics was very much something he had brought along. Nobody in India would have thought of it. That's one reason why Sardar Patel should have become the first prime minister. I mean, he was a very down-to-earth man. He was not as sophisticated as Nehru, and that's what's good about him. He would have started the economy like from the ground up, and what you would have gotten was the same as what Hindus would have done who live in the diaspora. You see, today in America, Hindus are the richest immigrant community. In England, an Indian is the prime minister. You see, you people create success stories everywhere you go, except in India. At least in India under Nehru. Now under Modi, of course, it's becoming a great success story. And I mean, as a foreigner, I can witness if you come back to India, every other year, I mean, it's amazing what progress you see. progress in terms that Westerners understand, material progress, better, airports and hotels and so on, the stuff that tourists see of India, there the advancement is remarkable. You know, when I first came to India, communication was an enormous problem. Once I had to phone home, you see, I had to go all through Varanasi to a cantonment area where there was a post office, and there you had a very bad quality of a telephone line. And now everybody who's on smartphone has his bookkeeping in this little box and so on. I mean, it's amazing. So I mean, I guess in terms of material culture, this is the greatest revolution that India has ever gone through. And so, to a large extent, it's the merit of the government, but to a very large extent, it's the merit of just the Indian people. You see, what Sardar Patel would have done is to leave the initiative to the Indian people. And, they are quite capable. We don't need the government for that. The same thing at the intellectual level. You mentioned Sai Deepak, so he's part of what you could call the Hindu intellectual ecosystem. So outside the Sangh Parivar, you had the growth of these internet media like Opinia, or now, of course, visual. These podcasts, Jaipur dialogues, P Gurus, Sangam talks, and so on. And so they are enormously influential. And so they reach many more people than Sitaram Goel was able to do at the time. Also, you see there that things happen in the world that Hindus haven't done, but that work greatly in favor of the Hindu cause. Like this, the whole rise of the internet, is so good for Hindus. First of all, it bypasses the power position of the fourth estate, as they say, the media, which was completely anti-Hindu, is now not important or has been forced to reform itself. Like, look at the newspapers during the Prana Pratisthas. They were full of Ayodhya. And, I remember the Times of India at the time of the demolition and so on as very anti-Hindu. So, I mean, that ecosystem has wrought a revolution outside itself. It has greatly influenced the media, partly the education system and so on. Now, that's a completely private initiative. That's not the government or so. That's not the BJP IT cell, which is so active on Twitter and so on. That's something else. So you see, Hindus themselves have done it. Yes.
Before after.
Yeah.
So in early days of the Ayodhya movement, in 80s, so some of these slogans at that time it was done say on Hindu. But then there was the othering of the Muslims and things like that. What was being played upon at that time was the Hindu sense of vulnerability, the sense of inferiority complex of these were things which were being displayed very, very prominently. And also the iconography, psychography, Ram appears as a muscular and as a warrior. It was the Hindu inferiority that was being played upon the sense of vulnerability. That was the start of it. How we have this the battle has been won. Do you think it makes any difference to the legal side?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, it's a boost, it's a great encouragement. But then again, I mean, we have to also take some distance and see that everybody's flying high at the moment, but maybe things can happen that suddenly put you with your feet on the ground again. I've always been warning, now the elections have not been won yet. Something may yet happen, I don't know, maybe Pakistan will throw an atomic bomb or something so that people are not so enthusiastic anymore. I don't know. Among the practical possibilities, one thing I see is this common civil code initiative. You see, the BJP has for 10 years not done what it should have done. There are a number of anti-Hindu discriminations in the constitution. You see, most people don't know that. The BJP has done absolutely nothing to create awareness of that, let alone to do something about it, which they now, since 2019, are in a position to do. They haven't done anything. Indeed, there was a private bill by Satyapal Singh to abolish these discriminations. And he was bribed to withdraw this, to let it die. He was bribed, mind you. You see, so they really invested literally in keeping these issues out of, even of publicity, let alone practical action. That's serious. Nevertheless, certainly they do want to do something Hindu, namely create a common civil code. Now, that's dangerous. You see, I think as a general principle, first things first. So you see, whatever you say about this common civil code, these anti-Hindu discrimination should have been abolished first thing. You see, if any leftist party had this program, they would have tabled it the evening of their election victory. All right? Whereas all the BJP devotees have been saying, but take time. They've done it like 10 years. What do you want? You see, they started the evening of the elections. Anyway, now instead they want to do this abolition of the common civil code. That I think, first of all, is less important. For Hindus, it will not make much difference. It is for secularism that it will make difference. It is grossly unsecular to have different laws for different people. And so it's the secularists should have a test of secularism. Namely, are you in favor of a common civil code or not? And so I'm in favor of a common civil code in general. Nevertheless, I also see that in terms of practical politics, it's not a priority. And it is very dangerous because what you may get is an enormous Muslim reaction. Now, so far that hasn't happened because the proposal is only for the state of Uttarakhand. A minor state and so on. And so here I would say, the overused word masterstroke, here might in fact apply. You see, maybe they can do this by first starting it in one state before they try it in India as a whole. Actually, that may be a very good idea. Maybe it wasn't thought up as a good idea, but that's how it works out. Maybe because we're not there yet. You see, the thing is that the Sharia, the Islamic law, is an intrinsic part of Islam. They are going to say, this is against our freedom of religion. This is against our right to be Muslims. To be a Muslim means to practice the Sharia. So we don't want a common civil code unless you all want to follow the Sharia. All right? But so we don't want to part with the Sharia. And so, you see, if you announce that on an India-wide scale, what you will get is riots emanating from every mosque in India. because, first of all, it's against their own definition of Islam to live without the Sharia. And secondly, it offends every single Muslim dignitary, every mufti, every imam, and so on, because their power over the Muslim community is also based on the Sharia. And so what you would get is riots everywhere. And I don't think the BJP is capable to withstand these riots. You see, I mean, everywhere in the world, both in India and abroad, people are going to blame the BJP for these riots, even though what they do is purely secular, namely a common civil code. But they're always going to twist it to, make the BJP guilty. Now, if you see that they can't even have Nupur Sharma say the truth about Muhammad and Aisha, what are they going to do here? Faced with all these riots, they gave in to the farmers' protests a few years ago. Remember? So here they're certainly going to give in. So they're not going to achieve a common civil code. They're only going to worsen their own reputation. Even many Hindus may not vote for them anymore because they don't want trouble in their streets. Who knows? So you see, if the government of Uttarakhand gets really serious about it, this may still happen in Uttarakhand. There were many riots in Uttarakhand, including a number of dead, because of some madrasa or something that was illegally built and that was being demolished. Okay, a very small affair compared to the abolition of the Sharia. So I don't know yet. I haven't seen these riots yet, but they may still happen. If not, then they're just very, very lucky, which is also possible. So here, let me say something else again. Just like with the rise of the internet, you see things work out well for Hindus. Like the rise of the internet is also very important because it encourages visual media. That's very, appropriate for the common Hindu. They're not given to reading. Yeah, I mean, let's face it, you see, Hindus are not Icelanders or Russians or Jews who are very book oriented, you see. But now you don't need to be book oriented anymore to be really with it. You have everything digested and pleasantly presented in podcasts and so on. So this development went much in favor of Hindus. Here, similarly, things may happen in society that are in favor of the Hindus. I mean, I always wonder, as a modern Westerner, not very given to religious rituals and so on, all these pujas and all these yajnas that Hindus do. On the one hand, I am inclined to say with most people in the West, what a waste of time. On the other hand, I notice that somehow all these pujas create good vibrations that somehow make things happen in your favor. And so you see, I see developments happening that somehow end up benefiting Hindus. And so maybe it all may work out in the end. Yeah, why not? Okay, last one. Yes.
Related to Modi and son. How influential is the persona of Modi compared to the collective influence of Sun in the shaping the political lifestyle of
Yes, how influential is Modi as a person? Well, of course, the movement is important, and also the movement has shaped him into what he is. Nevertheless, you see, having seen him speak a few times, I can't deny that, he's a category of his own as a speaker, as a public figure. I mean, the way he keeps stealing the show, these goof up boys in Washington, like Biden and Trump, or this, sturdy, humorless strongman in Beijing, they always have to watch the show being stolen by Modi. I mean, Modi is a very, it's pleasant to look at, diving into the sea to worship Krishna. Yeah, I mean, who does that, so, I mean, he also does it for that. Like, is he going to, open not only the bridge to Bet Dwarka, the island city, but also you see opening unveiling the statue of Shankaracharya and so on. And now, of course, the Prana Pratishtha. I mean, he's a great showman, and people like that. Yeah, I mean, I noticed that Indians are very fond of it, and he is good. I mean, having seen him, like his speech in Ayodhya was masterful. And so, I mean, when after the event, when you take the text of his speech and you study it, I do have some criticisms here and there, but, the way he presented it was just impressive. So yes, I think his person is very important. There's no one like him that could have replaced him. Is that an answer to your question? Yes, Professor.
I think everybody must be wanting just. I hope you haven't had enough. I just have a few comments to make. Um, just to fill in a lot of what you were saying. First of all, Islam may have colonized India, but they never engaged with our culture in the sense that, there was no debate. They would just come, kill, plunder, loot, and then rule. But they never would engage. They never vilified Hinduism as such. On the other hand, the British had a different agenda. And they had done this in the Americas and Tasmania and Australia. They eliminated whole populations earlier. But after the Industrial Revolution or during it, they just realized that, that would be a little bit uncouth. So they instead, I mean, there are the recorded history of how they studied, especially the Hindus, and there's a conscious effort not to touch the Muslims because they needed Islamists all over the world to fight their Crimean wars and other events. So they left them alone, and they attacked the Hindu schools. I mean, how many of you would really know that there were the literacy in India, which is defined as it is now, which was defined during the late 18th century, early 19th century surveys, was the ability to read and write, do some simple calculations, and have a skill. And the average literacy in Europe at that time, including England, the average literacy was about 5%. And in India, any guess how much could it be? It was 88%. And what to talk of?
When the Britishers came.
This is, well, after Plassey, they did the surveys. So even till Plassey, they didn't know that they would be ruling India. They thought that they came as mercenaries initially. And then towards the end of the 18th century, the possibility that they could rule. And so they did these surveys, very systematic surveys. And district after district is reported in Dharampal's book, in The Beautiful Tree. Yeah, so it's, and the way systematically they cataloged it. And so another fascinating thing that came out in the surveys was that the distribution of the teachers who were teaching in this whole network of schools. Would you believe it? 90% of the teachers were Shudras. What do you, so from then on, and if you look at the literature on oppression by Brahmins or caste system being oppressive, all that literature was foisted upon us for something, for some other reason. The entire, after demolishing this system, and was very easy. There are these debates by Wilberforce. This is in early 19th century, and he was the architect. He was in Cambridge. I'm sorry. So, in fact, my department is on Wilberforce Road. He's very decorated. So they studied how this network of schools were being fed, and they banned all those mechanisms. All the people feeding money, or the states, Hindu states, money going into these schools. They were all banned. And they rubbed their hands with glee when they saw the entire edifice crumbling down. And the entire blame then John Mills, who never ever had visited India, he was given the task of placing the entire blame on our societal issues. That it's whatever has happened, it's because of us. And an entire elite class, there was a template created of an entire elite class that would imbibe this narrative. And they did. If they wanted jobs, if they wanted to have a comfortable life, they had to snuggle up to the British. And they started believing in that. Now, and this template was taken over for some other reason after the independence by the Marxists. It's because by vilifying in Hindus, there were lots of power centers. Hindus had their own gurus, their Shankaracharyas, and so on and so on. Marxists don't like it. They want one power center, authoritarianism, and which goes against the basic tenet of Hinduism. So they continued with the vilification and dismemberment of the society. And now, I'm sorry to say, to be an intellectual, I mean, if you hate our culture, you're an intellectual. If you say anything nice about your culture, you're backward. That's the Indian elite became the enemy. And one thing that the Ram Temple has achieved, the common man, the so-called backward people, they retain the civilization memory. And that's when all the people they were trying to divide, they were all there. They were all there in the Jai Shri Rams. So, and we have Anamika, she's trying to make a film on it, and I've perhaps betrayed her flyer. But this should be known that is the biggest enemy of India is the Indian elite. And so they have let India down because and they can't get out of it because you're educated right from NCRE books all the way to graduation. I have hundreds of examples. Meenakshi Jain's thesis was rejected. She was told to take, not even to study in the direction. And it was much later. And there were these expressions, like when excavation were going on in many sites, in Fatehpur Sikri, for example, lots of Jain idols were discovered. And all the Irfan Habib, Romila Thapar, Panikkar, they all sat in a conference and they said, oh, this is an example of saffron archaeology. So, and the entire elite, that was all the students, they just clapped at it. And after that, all that was, as the terms used, they were all censored, deplatformed, cancelled. So anybody's talking about that, talking about, any archaeological evidence. So the only thing that is with the common man who has actually rejected the elite is the truth. The truth can make us win, but we have to bring it out. And Ram Sarup was an icon really. And Sita, Goel and Ram Swarup, they were iconic in this, their effort. All I say is they were unlucky. They were ill-advised legally. The prayer in the Calcutta Quran petition was they they described all the verses that were against our constitution, even against equality. But at the end of it, the prayer was, hence Quran should be banned. Who the hell makes such a prayer? How can any court ban the Quran? That was one single line prayer. And that's why the petition was thrown out. So after doing so much effort, the same thing was done, same mistake was done by Rizvi. Anyway, so these people, then right in the beginning, you talked about Gandhi. I just feel, well, yes, it was common man's reaction, but his assassination was the biggest blow to our effort. So much. If Gandhi had not been assassinated, uh, the Congress would have lost elections. People were very unhappy, but and then they were very happy that he was assassinated. So all the entire blame went to ये सारा कहते हैं ना वो ठीकरा फोड़ दिया on the Hindus, and they got away. So it was a very unfortunate thing. It was, I think, again, Nathuram Godse was very ill-advised.
Gave this impression, assassination, that the kind of secularism got associated there was going to give more common sense in India.
Yeah.
But I think that this assassination only gave a lease of life.
Yes, yes, tremendous lead of life.
And
so,
the spotlight was all lying against success.
yeah. And as I said earlier, it's our own elite. It's all these products of JNU and the leftist leading people. They are everywhere. They are in Cambridge. They are in New York Times. They've never ever written anything positive about India. Never ever. It's all they've blown out anything. These days, this rape of the Brazilian couple. That's in all news, Guardian, New York Times, BBC, everybody's about it, that India is an unsafe place. And we don't do this. I mean, there are so many rapes taking place. I mean, we have examples of an Indian student landing up in Maryland University, next to the Capitol, and she was mugged. I mean, did we ever come out? Or did anybody in the world say Washington or America is a place where people get mugged? No, nobody does that. But in India, we have our elite to thank for that. All sitting in plum positions, all these journalists sitting in everywhere. And they're all, anyway, I could go on and on about it, but I think people. So this is really unfortunate, and we have to mobilize somehow this will of the common man and let the truth be spoken. And unless that is done, I'm sorry, we have a lost case. We are thoroughly disorganized. We don't have the kind of funding that our enemies have. They're very well organized. They're very well motivated. Our texts don't motivate anybody to murder. Our texts don't. Our texts just tell us to find your own peace. How beautiful it is. And I think there is a movement, there's a realization the world over that the entire Abrahamic way of life is a root cause of the strife that is now that has befallen and is befalling on the whole world. It's the Indic way of life, which is an answer to that. Somehow this has to be brought out, and it has to be brought out in a very concerted manner. And there are people who are thinking about it, but we don't have enough funding. All this should be done at the level of the state, because the Marxists, they got a home run at the expense of the exchequer. Every year you have lakhs of students coming out with India was a place जहाँ सतीयत प्रथा होती थी, जहाँ you have to read Meenakshi Jain's book on the sati pratha. It is we have none of the Raja Dasha's queens committed sati because they thought they had still had a role to play. I mean, sati pratha in Harshvardhan's time, Harshvardhan's mother committed sati when the father was still alive because she said that she can't bear the pain. Her husband, who used to fight like a lion, who was uh, so distraught and helpless, and she died before her husband. And everybody prayed to her, pleaded with her. The custom was that if anybody announced, it's like Sanghara in Jainism. If anybody feels that he has no more role left in life, he announces that, look, I want to go. And all his dear ones plead with him that, no, no, you have X role to play, Y role to play. And then he argues against them. If they don't succeed in convincing him, the bigger kutumb descends on him. But if they're not able to convince him, then he goes, they let him go. Now, this was the essence of the sati. And then, of course, after the Mughals came, women didn't want on the Islamic invasions, when it was known that they would even the corpses would be raped. So women committed johar, which was distinct from sati. But anyway, so all the kuritis, our students, they come up with the vilification of Hinduism, ki that is when the caste system hai. We never had the caste system. Gautam Buddha, you'd all agree that he was a great thinker. Had there been his 4 signs, did they include caste oppression? Wouldn't he have noticed that? He didn't. Mahavira, did he mention caste system? He didn't. In Pali, at that time, there were just 2 castes. You see, at any given time, there will be people who would be making an assessment and writing about it. I'm getting all this gyan from Dr. Lokesh Chand. He told me all about it. Yeah, so and so there was never an oppression as such during Mauryan period, and even during Buddha's period. The only people who people were scared were the Chandals, because Chandals would be disposing of the dead bodies. All these traits were not inherited. Anybody who was disposing the dead body was a Chandal, and they would come in a city beating drums, and people would get scared, ki kaun mara, kaun mara, and they'd go inside their homes. So, but for that, there is no mention of any oppression, no mention of any, consciousness of a particular caste. And as I said, the weavers, the Shudras, they were contributing so much to the GDP. They were, and without them, the society would have fallen. All this is not taught. All of this is there. Is for there to learn, and it's been very consciously being suppressed in our curriculum. Now this has to come out, and it cannot come out by individual efforts. It has to come out with a state patronage on a large scale. And unless this has happened, I'm sorry, we'll slowly fade into oblivion. Thank you.
It has been an intellectually enriching experience, and we trust that you all part with a better understanding and fresh perspective on our focus topic. Now, I call Talishka, the Joint Secretary of Garden Studies, to give over. Good afternoon, everyone. I stand here today as a proud and grateful student to express my heartfelt thanks to all who have made this event successful. On behalf of the Homestead Circle, I thank our honorable speaker, Dr. Conrad Ellis, who spared time from his busy schedule to grace the event. We thank Professor Daksh Yoria, for chairing today's meeting. I would also like to thank our principal, Professor Madhu Sinha, for being a strong source of encouragement that helped us carry out these events smoothly. We also thank Professor J.K. Sinha, convener of IQAC. Nextly, I thank our convener, Dr. Satish Shah, for being a catalyst that stimulated us to do our best and standing as a village friend and to all the faculty members for being so supportive. I would also like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the TIC of Political Science Department, Dr. Rajiv Vidya, for being a strong supporter of the center. Our very thanks are also for keeping the audience with us. Lastly, I would like to thank our audience and esteemed faculty members for their gracious presence and students for their active engagement in making this event a great success. Thank you so much.